I think the best piece of advice that I could give a person is that you won't grow personally or professionally unless you get outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
If you were comfortable and you stay in your comfort zone, you'll stay exactly where you are forever. And that's okay for some people, but I think most people, and probably listening to your podcast.
I agree 100%. And again, I can only speak from my experience or what I've seen in other people is I grow. People call it growth. I develop, I improve, whether it's a skill or as a person, the most when I am the most uncomfortable. Welcome to another episode of the Matthews Mentality Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Matthews, and today we have an exciting guest who's shaping the future of sports, media, and technology, Zach Leonsis. Zach, good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
Right. So Zach is the president of media and new enterprises for Monumental Sports Entertainment, which owns and operates the Washington Capitals, the Washington Wizards, the Washington Mystics. Is it like eight teams or 5 venues?
Yeah, we've got several different teams. We have several venues. We have our own network. We're filming this and recording this out of our studio.
You like my new
Washington,
podcast
DC.
studio?
I do. You look at
amazing.
home here. I think it's pretty good. Worked out well.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is a mismanagement of expectations. I talk all the time about the key to happiness is managing expectations. I walked in the studio. It's like, oh my God. And now I got to go back to my homely little studio in Nashville when we're all done. We're coming to you live from DC.
But you can come back. You can film future episodes.
All right, fair enough. But so real quick before we get started, Zach was going to kill me if I don't say, make sure to subscribe to the podcast, like, share some warm fuzzy comments, and or post some warm fuzzy comments. Make sure to share this with friends and family. But Zach is the president of Media and New Enterprises, as I mentioned, for Monumental Sports Entertainment, where he oversees all media operations, team rights agreements, and corporate development activities. Under his leadership, Monumental has made major moves, including acquiring NBC Sports Washington and investing in cutting-edge companies like Team Liquid, Epic Games. Is Epic Games like
Fortnite?
Like Fortnite. So my 14, I was reading this. I was like, man, that sounds familiar. Fortnite.
It's huge.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to you on that one. And Dapper Labs. Zach has been recognized as a 40 under 40 honoree by both the Washington Business Journal and Sports Business Journal, and he was recently inducted into SBJ's 40 under 40 Hall of Fame. He's a powerhouse in media, sports, and technology. We're diving into all today. Zach, I'm really excited to be sitting here with you.
Thanks for the complimentary intro. There's a lot of hoopla.
I mean, you sent it to me. Right? Or your team did.
Yeah, geez, okay.
All right, so what in the world does a day in the life look like as the president of a sports and entertainment platform?
Operating in the sports entertainment industry, I think, is different from any other business on the planet. In most other businesses, you're focused on your shareholders and your customers. For us, I think we realize that we hold a bit of our region's morale in our hands. When our teams are competing for championships, the excitement is high. I think back to when we won the Stanley Cup and we had the Stanley Cup parade on the National Mall. We had over 700,000 people decked out in red. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or a Republican in Washington, D.C. The Caps won and everything was great. On the flip side, when you don't win, people feel the pain. So I often talk about how, I have an iPhone today and I love my iPhone, but if another new, better product was introduced tomorrow, I wouldn't necessarily be loyal to my iPhone. I'd pick up the new product. People don't do that with sports teams. I think our brands, they intertwine their personal identities with the actual teams that they support. And so we have to think about our business through many different and unique lenses, from a business perspective, from a fan perspective, but also from a community perspective, and how we give back and how we treat our neighbors, how we volunteer and donate financially in the community. I believe we can accomplish all of those things, competing for championships, building a great revenue generating business, and also doing well in the community. They're just different lenses that I think we have to look at in sports versus any other business.
So I think we just solved the political problem of Washington, D.C. already. Is the key to bipartisanship.
We need to win more championships.
You have to win more. That's been the problem in D.C. these last, couple of years.
Easier said than done.
I bet.
mean, they're 29, 31, depending on the league, other really, really talented, smart, groups, teams with a lot of financial
Well
wherewithal,
funded. Yeah.
well funded. And so, on those times when you do get to punch through and you do get to the top of the mountain, it means something.
Well,
And we've
yeah, I'm
been
going to ask you
lucky.
about, what was it, 2018 with the Capitals when you
Yep.
guys won it all? I saw the pictures of you with a beard hoisting the trophy. You looked very happy.
I was very happy after marrying my wife and the birth of my kids,
Yeah.
which hadn't happened yet when we won the Stanley Cup. It was
How many
definitely the
how many
best day of my
beers
life.
in were you when you were hoisting that thing? Like,
Probably a
yeah,
dozen.
that's right.
I
That's
won't
good.
lie.
Did you guys take a look at no Redskins, the Commanders? Did you look at the Commanders over because it's been talked about for sale, but was it a year or two ago when that actually
A
happened?
couple of years ago, our focus has been elsewhere, frankly. The way we operate our business, we're a unique business in sports entertainment. Most sports organizations are just one team or a team and a venue. For us to have multiple teams, multiple venues, and our network, we see a lot of synergy by fully integrating all the assets. And the NFL is kind of a different beast from the other major four leagues, frankly. The NFL doesn't rely on any sort of regional sports network model, right? We own a regional sports network here. We're in those studios. A lot of it is driven by national. It's much fewer games. So I think that we find, frankly, synergies with some other sports, frankly, more than the NFL. And we've been very public in saying that we're open to acquiring new businesses. We've been growing quickly on an
Yeah.
organic basis. We proved that we're able to acquire and fully integrate other businesses into our platform. We talk about our company like a platform. We've got shared services that scale the right way from an expense standpoint. We proved that when we integrated our network into our business. We sell across all of our assets in an integrated way. So we've one totally coordinated sales force that now sells both sponsorships and television ads. We've got one shared database. We reach about or a little over 5 million fans in the DMV. We get upwards of 3 million people through our turnstiles annually at Capital
Wow.
One Arena. That's very different, frankly, from an NFL stadium that might fill up the building a dozen times
Yeah.
annually. I mean, we fill up our building up to 250 times a year.
Yeah,
It
it's a
is a
volume business for
building that's
sure.
always in motion. So,
Well, selfishly, if you ever, I would love if you bought them, or if you ever buy an NFL team, I just need one of those like 10-day contracts so I can tell
yes,
everyone that I play in the league,
that you made it.
because I got two brothers who did, and they hold it over my head like pretty consistently.
Well,
Like, hey,
if
come
I
on.
had brothers and I was in a similar position, that would frustrate me.
All
I
right,
get it.
so
I get it.
in
But we'll
just,
do that if
I
that
want you.
happens.
Let's table that. In the event you buy a team, just remember to sign me up for a day or two, because I got to just put that to
Maybe
bed.
we'll do a 10-day contract in the NBA. You could. Neither of them have been in the NBA. There you
Oh,
go.
there we go. All right, see? Could you imagine me on a 10-day contract?
There you go.
I'm not a good basketball player, and if I were to liken my game to anyone, it's like, for an older fan, a Dennis Rodman; for a newer fan, a Draymond. Like, put me on the best player, and I will get both of us ejected because I'll start a fight. But like net, that is a value add to the team.
It could be.
Like, I
It
just
could
like
be.
the
We
role play
value
this.
toughness,
Role play
clearly.
this. The Wizards are playing the Lakers. I mean, who's better, Luka or LeBron? They're both amazing. Just put me on one of them, and I'll get in there. I'll just cause a problem, and I'll start a fight. I'll throw a punch, and we'll both get ejected. Deal?
I guess that. Yeah, I guess it's a strategy.
All right. So, not to dive head first into the weeds of sports, but like, are there any how do you say it? Are there any conflict rules about owning professional sports teams in the same town across the leagues? Like, do they want? Because I thought I'd heard something in the NFL. Speaking of which, that you could only own an NFL team, you can't own others.
I believe
there's
there was
ways
a
around
rule
that.
in the NFL that said if you own an NFL team, you can't fully consolidate it with some other organizations. I think that happened after some aftermath of some teams in Miami. But no, there aren't rules in certainly our leagues. We're one of only a couple organizations that have multiple assets all in one region. There are a couple organizations out there that have teams and venues in multiple markets. Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment, for example, is the Devils and the Sixers Prudential Center. They also have Crystal Palace in Europe. Fenway Sports Group has the Red Sox. They own the Pittsburgh Penguins, Nesson, Pittsburgh Sportsnet, and Liverpool. That is one strategy, a sort of roll up of, iconic assets, if you will, diversity across market, diversity across different leagues. Our strategy is we want to focus just on Washington, D.C., because that's where we think we find operational leverage
Sure.
from that full integration, like we mentioned. And we're in a great market, I might add. Washington, D.C., smaller than New York or LA, but it's the most powerful city in the world. One of the most
Literally
influential
the most
markets. Yeah,
powerful. Yeah.
it's one of the most influential markets on planet Earth, and it's one of the most affluent markets. It's one of the most highly educated markets. It's a tri-state area across Virginia, the district, and Maryland, even bleeding into parts of North Carolina, West Virginia, Delaware. So, our media market goes toe to toe with any of the other big ones in the country.
Yeah,
We think it's a real advantage for us.
I agree. It sounds makes sense, right? And I think part of the reason I asked is there was I can't remember his name. Like I was actually partied with a guy a couple times in Manhattan Beach, but Cronky's kid,
Josh?
I think it was Josh.
He was a
Uh,
great guy.
he was great. I think it was they were gonna buy the Rams or something. So I want to say Josh was gifted the Avalanche because there was a conflict. That's why. So in my head, I always had this like, can you own two teams
They
across?
do own the Avalanche and the Nuggets, and the
Yeah,
family also owns the Rams
yeah,
and Arsenal. So
yeah. They own a lot.
they have a very impressive
But
sports
the way you said it
portfolio.
is actually owning multiple teams. You kind of touched on this, multiple teams in the same market. There's synergies. They're complementary. You can leverage the database of one team to support the other and vice versa without really having probably conflicts outside of who gets to use the stadium on any given night.
You got it. I think that's where we find that's our special sauce, if you will. We don't want to operate anything in a silo. I think that's just like our management style. That's a philosophy that we believe in, and it's worked. It's worked in terms of when we value the company, when we pursue an equity financing, and also just frankly providing the teams with a stronger base of financial wherewithal to compete with, to spend on players, to spend to the cap. And, if the Wizards are, built to be a championship contender in the future, we would consider paying into the luxury tax. But we got to wait for the time when the team is ready to make that count,
Yeah, that's like get
obviously.
pushing all the chips to the center of the table for sure. I okay. Ooh, hard hitting question for you. Ready for it?
Okay.
All right. You didn't think you weren't. You're like, oh crap. I haven't tracked this, but obviously there's a lot of noise around Doge and job cuts to government that's concentrated in DC. Have you guys thought, or is that a concern from a fan base? Like, are they going to be able to renew season tickets if they lost their job? You follow?
I definitely follow.
It's not that hard
I
hitting of
think
a question,
that,
but
sports has proven to be a highly durable asset class,
mhm.
and it's proven to be a highly elastic price point, I would say. I think that people show up. We've lived through recessions. We lived through a pandemic, by
Yeah,
the way.
yeah,
Um, I think we have to be proactive, anticipatory, be responsible in our spending. Now, when we think about just larger recession potential and whatnot, yeah, we have to be thoughtful about that in terms of, will that impact sponsor spending in the future or whatnot? We partner with some of the biggest companies in the world. If their market caps are down, how does that impact a
sure.
renewal or something like that? But ultimately, we have the longevity now, the good fortune of being able to look back in history and know that these are moments in time and
Yeah, you'll
that,
be all right.
sports has endured.
Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, it's very sports is one of the last to go, right? I think that's
Yeah,
what people were the most upset about in the pandemic
I do
was like,
too. I think it
yeah,
was amazing. I mean, we had to shut our doors for over a year, and that was truly a terrifying experience to work in because there was no line of sight on when a vaccine would be
mm,
introduced and when we would be able to allow people back into our doors. I mean, it was outlawed. We literally couldn't. It wasn't just by
it was
choice.
illegal.
And so, at the very end of the 2021 season, we were permitted to bring in, I think, a 10% capacity crowd. So we had people sitting, 10 to 12 feet away from each other. It was odd. I remember attending some of those games in 2021 played in our building, which were essentially just played for television and the fulfillment of some sponsorship contracts. And it was eerie. I never want to do that again,
It
obviously.
was
So
weird.
happy the pandemic's
Yeah,
over. But then when we opened fully back up in 2022, I mean, we set record after
yeah,
record after record. And you saw it really take effect in the concert business too. I mean, 22 and 23 were boom times for artists and concerts. We
yeah.
set
I mean,
multiple records at
certainly
our
the
arena.
government printed a lot of money, and that's something in real estate we got to pay attention to in terms of inflation and where interest rates goes. So they had money, but I think we talk about in retail real estate, the one big lesson from a real estate perspective that we learned is people want to get out. They want to have experiences. They don't want to be stuck inside, especially for a year, over a year. And so it's not just having money. It's like, yeah, I think coming out of that from a sports and entertainment perspective, people were desperate to just be around people and the
Television and
human
media are
experience.
so important. Clearly, we believe in it. We
Yeah.
have our own television network and
Yeah.
we're streaming online. We want to be accessible. It's the number one way we reach our fans, but there's no replacing the in-arena experience. I always talk about sports as a religion, and that means the arenas of the cathedral. And
Yeah.
people like that joint community of sitting next to friends and strangers and slapping five after a goal is scored. That's a very special shared experience.
Normally it's later in the conversation where we talk kind of about tougher, darker moments in your life. But like, professionally speaking, was the pandemic, was that the hardest thing professionally you've ever had to navigate?
Professionally,
Yeah.
without a doubt,
Yeah.
because there was no playbook for it. Totally out of your control. I always try to tell myself, only worry about the things that are in your control. That was probably the first time I was like, oh, I really got to
Yeah.
worry about something that's not in my control. We need to be mindful and conserve cash. And it forced us to really prioritize what's important to us. And we focused on putting people first, then putting our property second, obviously servicing our mortgage, things like that. Then we put programs underneath that. And so we had to make some sacrifices to get through, but I'm really proud of how our organization got through that difficult period of time. We ultimately weren't an over-levered company. We debt financed our way through the pandemic. I mean, it was a very challenging time. Now we've improved on that profile because we've had
Mhm.
these rebound years, which is great. But yes, without a line of sight on when that would come back and needing to be transparent and have meetings, on a monthly basis and every 100 days with our company to tell them this is what's happening. People have families, we wanted to protect people, and I'm glad that we were able to do that. And I'm also glad we were able to get back to playing games. There was a period of time,
Yep.
if you remember, where people were questioning, you think people will ever go back to
Yeah.
traveling? You think people will ever go back to gathering in arenas and stadiums? And I'm sure pretty glad that they were wrong, but there was a shadow of a doubt for a period of time of, oh, maybe that
Yeah,
could be
and
the
I'll
case.
speak for myself. I wasn't, you're absolutely right. There was that contingent. I was like, will anybody ever go back? But I was more like, well, the closest thing I could equate it to is like the terror attacks in 9/11, where it's a couple days, weeks, months. It was like, will people ever really fly again? And it took many years for the airline industry to truly recover from that. And I'm not an expert, so I don't want to say like whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 years. That's what I figured: sports, concerts, travel,
Yep.
outside. And I was very wrong. It was like 12 months. Like, to your point, 22, 23, you guys set record years.
Yeah, people were ready.
They were
People,
ready.
and the other interesting phenomenon with the pandemic is because people stayed home for a year, they were saving on a lot of their traditional sort of fungible or consumer
Yeah.
spending.
Yeah.
So they had built up, for the most part, savings to spend. They wanted to go enjoy their lives again.
It was really the first time since 2011 that consumer savings rose in America. Cause for the previous decade, just from America's very much a consumer spending driven economy. They spent more than they made.
Yeah, I'll be clear. Never want another pandemic ever
No.
again. Personally and professionally, I felt like I matured significantly. I mean, you had to build some armor. You had to get tough.
Mhm.
You had to display some grit, and it builds confidence when you get through something
Yeah,
really
and
challenging.
you
like that.
navigated, not everything right, but you look back, you're like, gosh, some of the decisions I made were okay. I on a much smaller level in real estate, I understand that feeling. Let's talk about getting tough, and this is a mindset mentality podcast. Like, oftentimes we call it like agency or victimhood. Like, agency is I have control that I think you said control the things you can control. And the pandemic is, if there ever was a time where even the most hardcore, mentally tough, I'm in control of my life, people are like, okay, well, I'm not in control here. Did you ever feel like you might have gone to or go into what I call like victim mentality, where it's like, what, woe is me? Why is this happening? Like, there's nothing I can do, and if not, how do you avoid that? And then I'm going to ask a second question here, like a journalist, right? Is your role at the company at the time, did you feel people were looking to you for that confidence that like, hey, relax, everything's going to be okay? Because you're right. There was a period of time where nobody had any idea how
I
this
think
would
if
shake out.
anybody told you that during the entire pandemic they didn't have one moment of uncertainty, they'd probably be lying to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly there were some darker moments, but I think you got to have the wherewithal to pull yourself together. I also think we do a we did and we do a good job of trying to reconsider challenges as opportunities. And to be frank, that's exactly what we did when we bought our network. We weren't the only industry that was challenged. Our media companies were challenged. There were rumors about sales processes. There were layoffs happening. We saw what was happening with NBC Sports Washington, and we said, we already own a third of this business. It may not be all that important to a larger organization like Comcast, but it is for us. It's the number one way we reach our fans. We still reach nearly 3 million subscribers in the DMV. Half of our games are on the road after
Mhm.
all. Would you be open to selling this? And the answer was yes. And about a year and a half later, we were able to do that. We debt financed this acquisition and then later paid that down via an equity financing that we did. So we were also opportunistic. We didn't have to always have a defensive mindset. We could think about how do we make a challenge an opportunity. That was an example. We did a process internally called Build to Better. We reviewed a lot of budgets. We talked about prioritizing people, then property, then programs. We reconsidered some programs. It was a good, sort of not cleansing experience, but it was a good experience to refine and make the company more efficient. And then it also made us reprioritize some dollars towards things that we thought mattered. Digital, for example. We hired our first ever chief technology officer right at the tail end of the pandemic. We knew that digital and technology wasn't a fad. And why we're such a big and sophisticated organization, we aspire to be a pre-IPO quality level company. It makes sense for us to be beefing up those resources.
Mhm.
So, um, yes, you have those moments of doubt, but then you need to internalize it and try to flip the perspective on how can I play offense here? Is there an opportunity to play offense? Because playing defense is hard. You got to play defense. If you
Yeah.
don't play defense, you won't win. But you don't want to play in your own end the whole
No,
game.
it's
You
not
won't
good.
win that way either. You got to figure out a way to play offense too.
So the audience knows what you do. We've heard a little bit about some of the opportunities, also some of the challenges, specifically COVID in your role. But let's talk about how you got there. You're from DMV. You're from the Beltway originally. This is where you grew up.
Yeah, we moved here when I was 4 years old, so
Oh.
I certainly think of myself as a DMV
Where'd you move
native.
from?
Florida. I was
Okay.
born in a little town called Vero Beach, Florida.
Yeah.
My father had started a company called Redgate Communications, and he sold it to this little company called America Online back in the
I
day
think I remember those
to
guys.
a guy named Steve Case,
Yeah.
who's a family friend. I think of him like an uncle practically, and yeah, and the rest is history. We moved to Great Falls, Virginia. It was close to Dulles, where AOL headquarters were, and my father enjoyed a great run there.
So your dad worked at AOL.
Hmm.
That was I remember it was like the dial up, right? Is
Yeah,
that what
exactly.
okay.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And you saw like the
And
process
then
on the
like
screen
your
of it
brother picked
connecting.
up the phone and it disconnected you and you're like,
Yeah,
"What are you doing?
yeah,
Come on."
exactly,
There's people
exactly.
listening, they have no idea what we're talking about. Like, "What?"
I remember it. I
Yeah.
remember we had one computer in the house, and it was a big deal to have the time to be able to do it. I wanted to play games as a little kid on
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
I
different
remember
time.
I remember when we first got our first LAN, like Ethernet
Yeah,
cable,
exactly.
and the speed of I was like, "This is
Game
insane,"
changer, right?
And then I
Exactly.
went down to college and I think statute of limitations on this, I'm good. Like I started, there was a little website came out, like only college kids knew it for a minute. It was like Napster. And so you just burn in all these songs,
Mhm.
and
I
which,
definitely burned some CDs
yeah,
back in the
yeah,
day,
yeah.
yeah.
So, sorry to the music industry. If knowing what I know now as a business owner, I wouldn't do it. But, um, but it was so fast. So AOL, that must have been a trip. Your dad doing that, like, because everybody kind of knew. There's a
Yeah, my
period of
father
time.
was
Yeah,
incredibly proud of and he's still very proud of
yeah.
what they built, and, not just that company itself, but sort of the other companies that they supported and that spun out of America Online. I mean, they were one of the first early partners with Google. as Google was just
Yeah.
getting started, for example. So Match.com was a company that was involved, advertising.com. So there was a whole ecosystem that I think my father looks very proudly upon and fondly back at.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I feel so much of that was happening in California and Silicon Valley. You guys were in Virginia, a little bit of an outlier there, but it sounds like they plugged into a lot of the right
People,
early
yeah, I don't
startups.
think people totally realize that Virginia and Washington, D.C. is actually really like the birthplace of the internet. It was a government
Yeah.
program. The transatlantic cable connects through the mid Atlantic. There's a
Mm.
reason why we've got so many data centers here in Northern Virginia. A huge percentage of the domestic internet traffic, runs under this road, Waxpool Road, where AOL was headquartered back in the
Mm.
day. So, yes, it's interesting to look back at histories. It feels like
Yeah.
AOL is a old school company
But it
now,
wasn't
if you
always.
will,
Yeah.
but it wasn't always
I think
like
I
that.
saw a heat map one time of like internet traffic in the US, and there's just this bright spot where, basically where we sit today.
Exactly, exactly. So, I mean, I've always thought that I'm, one of the luckiest guys, if not the luckiest guy in the world for a variety of reasons. I'm very close to my family. We've got a small family. I learned a ton from my father.
Yeah.
My father was successful. He's entrepreneurial. I learn from him every day. I'd like to think that I've gained some of that entrepreneurial spirit and some of the risk taking that we take here at Monumental. And he's been the world's best mentor to me. I'm very lucky.
I'll come back to that. You have brothers or sisters?
I have one little sister. She
Oh,
lives in
cool.
London.
Oh, London?
Yeah, exactly. So she went to Georgetown. Most of the time we study abroad
Yeah.
in Europe or something.
Yeah.
Well, Europeans study abroad
Yeah.
in the United
You just
States.
didn't come home, huh?
She met a British guy who was studying abroad. Great guy,
It's the accent,
Toby Helm,
It's like a cheat
and she
code.
chased them back to London, and they're married. They got 3
Yeah.
kids now, and I don't think she's coming back.
I got
Unfortunately.
friends who they have English accents. They have Australians. I'm like, look, you're not even that good looking. It's just your accent. This is it's a cheat. I always say it's a cheat code. Like,
Yeah.
come on, so I get it.
So
No,
I'm uncle to 3 little kids with British accents. It's a little
that's cool.
funky.
That
The
is-
first, my sister's firstborn, she was like, "Oh, I got to fly back to the U.S. to have the baby in the U.S. Got
Sure.
to be a U.S. citizen." Baby number 2, she was like, "It's fine. I'm just gonna
Are
have
they
her
not-
here."
yeah, I guess that they're not grandfathered in, or I don't know how all that
Yeah.
works. So, okay, so your sister, mom and dad, tight family. What was it like growing up? Obviously your dad is this executive, but your classic American, like your sports school.
Yeah, I had I mean, I wouldn't say like an extraordinary childhood. It was great. I had
Did you ever
a
think
great
you'd be
family
playing
and
for one of these teams one day? Like, were you?
yeah, of course, when you're a little kid, you
yeah.
always aspire. I grew up playing hockey. I love hockey. I
Okay.
obviously didn't
So
even come
hockey was the
close.
sport.
Yeah, I wasn't very tall, so I wasn't a great basketball player. All my
Yeah.
buddies, would beat me up
It's
on the
okay.
court.
I hear
but-
they have 10-day contracts on the Wizards.
That's
they're
right.
giving
Well,
out.
yeah,
So, because
there
I'm
you
going to
go.
sign up
Maybe you
for
have a
one after.
chance.
But yeah.
Although with all the fighting talk, maybe you'd do better on the hockey team.
That's
Frankly.
true. Yeah, I
Um,
just can't skate.
No, I think growing up, I realized that I was very lucky, and I had some good mentors even outside of my parents. One person who I always really admired and looked up to, and who was a family friend, was the late Eunice Shriver, and she founded Special Olympics.
Yeah.
And I wrote my senior thesis in high school, profiling her, and I really was so fortunate to have spent a full day with her way back when. And the parting words that really resonated with me were, to whom much is given, much is expected. And I see other instances where maybe people don't take these things as seriously. And the things that I have in my control or I can control, that I show up every day, that I pay attention, that I work hard, that I care, that I genuinely care about people. Um, those are the things that I can control, and that's what I try to do every day. And it's translated into some great business successes. Not all have worked out, and the things that don't work out, you learn from. Frankly, you can gain confidence from. You have to have a little humility about, and they help form the person, the exec that I guess I am today. So.
Was that, showing up, listening, working hard? Is that a fair way to describe you from, as young as possible, or was that something that came later in life?
I think it probably came to me in high school when I started to have a deeper world view, I would say. I was like head of our community service club at school and whatnot that continued in
Yeah,
college.
you were locked in by then.
Volunteerism is still really important to me. I volunteer monthly at DC Central Kitchen with my team. Huey over there and I have done it before. We've had hairnets and our beard nets on and
Mhm.
whatnot. And that's a lot of fun. I'm on the board of a couple charities and whatnot. So, I want to walk the walk and not just talk the talk there. I feel so lucky every day. It's the least that I can do. And I'm glad that our company has that spirit as well. But in terms of actually learning from a business perspective, um, there's no better way to learn than actually doing the work, than taking risks, than getting outside your comfort zone.
Agreed.
There have been plenty of times when I felt like I've been in over my head and I've just kind of picked myself up and said, you got to dig in. These are your playoffs right now. You gotta go all in. And experience teaches you a lot. Sometimes it works. You got to relish in those achievements and realize that they give yourself the credit that they don't always come together. And then in the things that don't work out, lick your wounds and get better from it.
Get better from it. How would you describe yourself as a kid? I know it's a tough question to ask, but just some adjectives.
As a kid, I like to
Yeah,
think
growing up,
I
junior
was a
high,
nice
high school,
kid.
yeah,
I mean,
nice.
I played sports in high school. I was tried to be a good student. I guess I had a couple of good role models where, I looked up to a guy who was going to an Ivy League school. He was all varsity athlete. He was getting straight A's. He had a pretty girlfriend. I was like, who doesn't want to be that guy,
Ah,
right?
I get it.
And so you got to have some models to try to chase after at the very least. And so,
Yeah,
I did my
aspire
best.
to.
Yeah,
I guess
exactly.
what I'm always just super fascinated about when I have the opportunity to meet with people on this podcast is the nature versus nurture question. Is it like, were you always like that because that's just how you were wired and put together, and you came out of the womb with whatever it is, the adjectives? I was disciplined, I was serious, or I was the opposite. I was kind of loose, and I was
Well, now that we're exploring this and I'm really thinking back to when I was like in fourth and fifth grade, I mean, I suppose there was always a time where my parents were pushing me to obviously get good
so I'm saying,
grades. And there was probably a year or two period where I was like, you know what? I might be okay just being a B student.
yeah.
That was my
Okay, so
rebellious stage or
let's double click on
something.
that. And this is the nurture part. Was your mom or dad or both like, hey, that is not allowed to happen in
No,
this house?
both of them, of course. And then it was probably some self-internalization as I, crept closer to high school, probably in seventh to eighth grade, that I was like, no, I only live once. I wanna make the most of this.
Let me ask you this, and I, if the answer is yes, I empathize. I had a little bit of this. My dad, he played football, right, for a long time. Different, I guess, some not a similar industry as today, but not AOL. But I felt like this. So I'll lead you here, get you comfortable. Was part of your motivation or your driver as a kid, especially as it sounds like you kind of developed into this very responsible young man. I mean, you're the head of all these clubs, and I'll fast forward, you got into a great Ivy League school. It was a lot of the why there. Was it because like you felt like, hey man, I want to be like this guy?
Um, yes, and, to be frank, I also felt like I had a slight chip on my shoulder.
Yeah.
Like I'm so lucky that I'm my father's son, but I know there are plenty of people out there who go, well, he's just in a certain position because of his father. And, I need to try to prove that wrong. I
Yeah.
need to do better. My father went to Georgetown University. He was on the board of Georgetown. I grew up going to Georgetown men's basketball games, and I always thought I'd go to Georgetown. And when the time came in high school, I said, I got to do something different.
Yeah.
And I applied early to Penn and got in, and that was the best decision, one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. So I think I felt that more when I was younger. And now as I get older and wiser and more experienced, I feel that less and less and less. And I know who I am,
Yeah.
and I'm my own worst critic. And I think that, probably the most successful people are their own worst critic. I kind of have a decent barometer on when I've done well or when I haven't. I don't really listen too much to what others have to say. If they say, oh, you did great on that one, or I kind of thank you, but I kind of know how I feel and how I did. So I think that's an important thing. You got to have your own barometer on
Yeah.
how you actually did.
Yeah, I always, for me, and again, I'm empathizing, but also co-signing is like growing up is like, oh, you're Clay's kid, you're Clay's kid, you're Clay's kid. Or then as you get older, and then I had some brothers who played. So, oh, you're someone's a brother. And I'll speak for myself, but you're like, oh, I'm super proud of them and I love them and I have a great relationship and I'm their number one fan. But no, I'm me. Like, I'm not
Yeah,
somebody's
you're
this.
on your
And
own
so that was
person.
always a huge driver for me professionally, especially when football didn't work out, I was like, man, I got to do something because I don't want to be in somebody's shadow. And it sounds like in your own experience, you had some of that. And then over time, you've had more time to reflect and like, okay, there's always maybe some of it, but maybe it's not as big of a
Yeah,
driver today.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, clearly, I don't shy away from it. I work here in this organization, and thank goodness I get along with my father. We're super tight. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm developing my own reputation. I'm taking my own risk. We're
Yeah.
developing and running our own businesses and
Well, you
whatnot,
told
and that
offline, you told me
certainly
that's
helps.
because you're a better decision maker than him. So
I did not say
did we cut that? I'm just joking.
that.
I'm just joking. We can cut that. No, I'm just playing. So, all right, you go to UPenn. What'd you study?
I studied communications and commerce between Annenberg and Wharton.
Annenberg. There's a communication school at Penn.
Yeah,
There's an
yeah.
Annenberg communication school at USC.
Nice.
In fact,
There you
I think I
go.
got to talk to her next Thursday. I just found this out. So
There you go.
lucky me. So any sports in college or you just all student
No,
all the
I
way?
wasn't good enough. I wasn't good enough. Unfortunately, I would have loved to have played hockey, but Penn actually didn't even have a Division I hockey team. They just had a club team.
Really?
So yeah, it
No,
is what it is.
you didn't want, were there any times you're like, maybe I do the club thing or
I thought about it.
you were probably in one of those like skull and bone dagger societies at
I
Penn
was in
that,
a fraternity.
yeah,
I
that's what
just,
they call them,
yeah, yeah,
fraternities.
exactly. I just,
This is where they get together and they're like, okay, how are we going to rule the world?
yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. What is it? Princeton has the
Yeah,
what
it's
is
all
it,
those,
breakfast clubs or
yeah,
something. Yeah,
something like that.
supper clubs or anything. Yeah. So we just had fraternities at Penn.
The current president went to Penn, right?
The current president did go to
Yeah.
University of
A lot of people
Pennsylvania.
went to Penn. It's a great school. I think it's the number one business school, right?
It's been
Wharton.
ranked first overall several years for
Yeah.
sure. That and HBS.
And so you did well in college?
I loved my college
Yeah.
experience. Had a great time. Loved the academics. Made some of my best friends in college. I ultimately did scratch my Georgetown itch. I got my full time MBA there.
Was that right
Um,
after you graduated or was
I
it a
waited
couple
2
years?
years. I
Yeah.
came back. I worked for 2 years, and then I
Okay.
did that. And I worked part time here at Monumental, getting smart on a lot of our media operation,
Sure.
which was mostly outsourced to NBC, but our deal was coming up.
And what did you go get your master's in?
And it was an MBA,
MBA
Master of
business? Yeah,
Business
I got you.
Administration. Yep. So
Was that kind of part of your plan? Was like, hey, I'm going to go get a master's in business, but you already were leaning towards, and maybe you could maybe help me define kind of the media side of the business
I
or
think
the
that
entertainment.
I
Is
think
what,
that was an area of focus of our business that was underdeveloped. And so, frankly, it was an opportunity to grow my own roots, get my own elbow room,
Mhm.
get really smart in a space, and then display some expertise. And that's sort of a pattern that I followed in a variety of different categories in sports betting, for example, and esports and digital and streaming. Our focus as an organization was on sales and marketing and venue management. We didn't have many people focused on those different areas. And, as I got smarter in the space, we were able to make, real investments and buying teams like Team Liquid, which is now arguably the most successful esports team in the world.
explain Team Liquid to me.
So Team Liquid and esports, very, very unique ecosystem. In our world, we're used to distributing media through cable, through satellite. We're used to people gathering in person. It's sort of linear first, digital second. Um, Esports is really the first live event category that's digital first and linear second. And it's a whole community of fans that are avid gamers. These are people who are gaming anywhere between 4 and 8 hours a day, highly educated, very affluent, engineering savvy, young, not reachable by traditional
Mhm.
marketing. They're not subscribing to cable, for example. And
You get them on that Fortnite.
yeah, exactly. And so for us, we felt like we're in the community building business. This is a brand new community that we wouldn't reach otherwise. And traditional media is facing challenges. We should see how this is monetizing a big business on digital through Twitch and through streaming. And, there were reports out there that, the League of Legends World Finals was garnering the same amount of eyeballs as the Super Bowl, for example. Depending on how you match streams and Nielsen ratings, there can be some discrepancies. But the size of the esports sort of community and size of the engagement was nothing to snicker at. So I met with probably 40 people across the ecosystem: publishers, tournament organizers, teams, investors, blue chip brands investing in the space, and passed on several different opportunities until we found Team Liquid, um, which we fell in love with because the operators were great. They had the respect of the different publishers. They competed across a dozen different esport titles, so they were title agnostic and titles come and go. And we felt like if publishers ever did franchise modeling, which some of them did, Team Liquid would be first in line to get it, and that proved to be the case. And so, Team Liquid is now a global powerhouse. They've got headquarters in Los Angeles and Amsterdam,
Hmm.
in Sao Paulo, Brazil. They've got over 300 employees. They're profitable. They'll do well over $60 million in revenue. They just won one of the biggest esports titles in the world called the International for a game called Dota 2. So they've been a huge success story in esports, and through that, it became a lightning rod for access to other opportunities like Epic Games, like Niantic, like Dapper Labs. And so esports has been a fun ride. Sports betting was another similar
Yeah, I
experience.
wasn't aware of sports betting. Yeah, walk us through the.
So, in the sports betting space, sports betting was illegal. And we
Until
were
it wasn't. Yeah.
until it
Yeah.
wasn't, but we were introduced to a company called Sport Radar, which was very popular in Europe and was just starting to come over to the United States to compete with businesses like Stats and Eliash Sports Bureau and whatnot. And, their key advantages were 100% accuracy of data, zero latency, and the third one was integrity services. They had data sets of millions of data points from games that they could correlate with activity in the real-time betting market. And they were able to coordinate with local authorities. Hey, here's match fixing happening. There's an anomaly in the data set. This isn't normal. It's worthy of an investigation. And sometimes there was nothing wrong, but every now and then they would find that match fixing was really taking place, and players, teams, referees, they could be jailed. And so they became a enforcement authority in the space in markets where betting was legal. And we all knew back in the day that even though sports betting wasn't legal in the United States, it certainly was happening. And there were reports that the black market was anywhere between $300 and $400 billion.
Wow.
And so we started to feel like the better approach would be to legalize, to regulate, to have the leagues have a seat at the table on how this could be rolled out in a tasteful way, in a manageable way, in a way that was best for the US consumer. And we made an investment in the Sport Radar, then we made an investment in DraftKings, and we ultimately became the first arena in North America to build a sports book within our four walls. We did it in partnership with William Hill, who was subsequently acquired by Caesar Sportsbook. And we're still trying to innovate in sports betting. Just a couple months ago, we integrated, we're the first RSN for an NHL and an NBA team to integrate real-time betting opportunities into our live video experience through our app. So I still think there's opportunity for sports betting to grow. We were certainly an early adopter, but these are areas where I try to get really smart and then add value. We've
Yeah,
we've kind of grown into this
sportsbook,
organic
sports
cool
betting,
thing.
video game, esports, like especially the esports. That's just something I don't know much about, and I know what sports betting is. I know what video games are. I don't obviously play them as much as my 14-year-old
I don't
son.
play them as much as I used to
Yeah,
either, but
yeah. I was a decent Halo player back in the day, but that was like then I grew up.
Halo was fun.
Halo was fun. But
In high school, yeah.
speaking of which, we had 4 Xboxes in my parents' house, and the only way you could play on 4 different Xboxes, you had to run the cables.
Yeah,
you
right,
know?
exactly. The LAN parties.
Oh, the LAN
Yeah.
parties were great.
I remember in high school setting up in buddy's
Yeah.
basement, 8 of us, a
Oh,
couple
it was
different
it was
TVs.
awesome. But where I was going with that is, correct me if I'm wrong, I would not consider that traditional service lines or industries that a kind of sports and entertainment platform or ownership of teams would go after. This sounds pretty unique and it's some ingenuity
Yep.
my question is, when you either came up or you were first presented with these ideas, I assume you had to take it to, some decision maker, whether it's a person or a board. Was it just like, was it, oh, Zach, yeah, this sounds great, let's do it? Or were you shut down multiple times? Like,
You have to get
you,
smart.
you
You have
follow
to be
me?
able
Like,
to
you understand
answer
my
these
question?
questions.
Yeah.
You have to be actually, you have to know what you're talking about.
Because my first gut, if I was an owner of teams and, making money selling tickets and putting the game on TV, the traditional way was like, what are you talking about? Right.
You have to
What
be
is this?
prepared. You can't fake it, because it only takes one question to kind of prove that, like, maybe you're a little shaky in your understanding or something, right?
You
We've
did.
we've done plenty of due diligence
That's what I
sessions
was going to
on
ask.
our
A lot of due
company.
diligence.
We've done a lot of sales efforts. I've gotten to know our organization wide, like back of my hand in terms of our numbers and how the different workflows all match up with each other and historically what's happened. You have to understand that, like I mentioned in that esports example, I mean, I met with 40 different people. I mean, I really became an expert on my own. I was attending conferences. I was earnest. I was listening. I was asking questions. Took time. It didn't happen overnight. Sports betting was the same. I mean, I got to know some of our sportsbook operators. I got behind the scenes tours in Las Vegas. I was talking with bookmakers actually themselves, talking with our leagues, advocating and lobbying with our leagues about how the rules could roll out, how we could deal with sponsorships. There were we Even when sports betting became legal, we weren't able to build a sports book within our four walls until we opened up the rules with the NBA to do so. Um, you got to know what you're talking about. You got to be prepared. We do a lot of Socratic method internally. We'll not in an intense way, but we'll question each other. Like,
Sure.
well, why would you want to do this? Because X, Y, and Z, right? And so you got to be on your toes. You got to be prepare and be ready for that. Practice like you want to play.
And so you're a young up and comer at the company. You're coming up with new ideas, not necessarily entirely on your own. It sounds like you had a good team around you. What do you look for when you in teammates or even people now that you're hiring for certain roles? What are the qualities like for the audience out there? We have a pretty broad audience, but a lot of business minded people that are looking to rise in their careers, whether they're 22 or 42, 62, whatever. What are some of the qualities that you really, really almost absolutely have to have in people that you hire
Hmm.
or that you work around? And what are some of the qualities that you're just like, I can't like these are toxic. I can't deal with
Well,
this.
with the most important execs, the highest quality execs, the hard skills are a given. So let's push that
Yeah.
aside. You really shift into EQ. Do we get along? Will this person respond well, not just when times are good, but when times are bad? Will they be intellectually honest with you? Will they hide bad news? Can you trust them? Will they do they know how to deliver bad news? Can they manage people? Um, can they manage their own ambition? Are they overly assertive, right? I mean, all of these things, your culture, you get to know a candidate. Will they fit in to what you're trying to do and whatnot? We really try to empower our employees and our executives. They run their own P&Ls. They bring their own ideas to the table. We practice Socratic method and let the best idea win in pretty much every case. Um, and then, I think we need people who um, have an entrepreneurial spirit. We're not looking to just do the status quo, just like cookie cutter like everyone else. We want to aspire to be the largest, most valuable regional sports entertainment platform in the world. And that requires us to do things a little bit differently. Acquiring this network was different than probably what most other organizations were thinking at the time. Um, Being a first mover in some spaces like esports, like sports betting, like crypto, or like expansion of funds and private equity entering the space, you've got to be willing to take calculated risks, live with the successes, live with the failures, and
I was
I
gonna
think we champion that with our employees. We're also very transparent. I think we're very transparent with our employees, and
also
that
just
builds
in terms of
trust.
their skills, like this is where you need to get better.
Well, sure. I mean, you have annual performance reviews, but I think more about like business performance and how programs are performing, and you know, hey, you may be running this part of the business and you've got several different programs and we tried to launch this one. It's not working. We can have an intellectually honest conversation about we're not going to do that next season. Um, but that's not going to discourage us from trying something
Something
new in the
different.
future because we think it could be a great opportunity. So,
I will ask you about private equity maybe towards the end. But you said something, and it's a fascinating question. I don't know if any we'll ever have the answer. Is like you said, hey, I really value EQ, right? Can you train EQ? Can you develop EQ? Can you learn it? Is it a skill you can learn, or is it just people have it or don't?
I think you can train it. I think probably as time goes on, it gets harder to train. I think some people get it faster than others, and maybe that's inherent. And if it's inherent, then it's certainly an advantage.
It's funny. There's always like a self test of if someone has EQ. Is like, have you ever heard someone say, I don't really have good EQ, right?
No one ever. Everyone thinks they've
It's
got
just,
great EQ,
which probably
but
tells them
but
they don't have
probably the
good EQ.
people with the best EQ have probably received the most feedback on,
Yeah.
hey, to be honest, the way you said that kind of rubbed a couple of people the wrong way, or hey, it came off a different way than I think you intended.
I hate to ever say there's a right and wrong way to do things. And if I do say that, it's just based on my life experience. My life experience is someone asks you if you have good EQ. If you say yes, you don't have good EQ.
Yeah, right, exactly.
What you
You don't have
should say is
self-awareness.
like, you know what? That's a great question. I don't think I could accurately
You should ask
I
one
could
of my
answer it.
colleagues.
What
Yeah,
I'd say is ask five of the colleagues I spend the most time and let them provide the answer. Then that
that's
would
a
be
very good
great
response.
EQ,
That's a
right?
very good response. I
Yeah.
agree.
Oh, I got great EQ. The fact that I think I've said that. No, dude, I really got good EQ. I'd have no EQ if I
You
didn't
know,
say that.
there are some people who you get knee deep in a deal and you're working late hours and you're here at midnight and you're in a conference room with 3 or 4 people.
That's where you get to know people.
You better like the people you work
Yeah.
with, right? And
Yeah.
and everybody needs to be feeling like a team player and not like it's a burden to be there. You know when to step up, and I mentioned earlier, it's like when it's your playoffs. You got to have people that have that mentality too.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
The best piece of advice I've ever received, gosh,
Told you I was bringing the heat today.
this is a really difficult question to answer. I think the best piece of advice that I could give a person is that you won't grow personally or professionally unless you get outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
If you were comfortable and you stay in your comfort zone, you'll stay exactly where you are forever.
Is
And
it
that's okay for some people, but I think most people, and probably listening to your podcast, so
Yeah, I think I agree 100%. And again, I can only speak from my experience or what I've seen in other people is I grow. People call it growth. I develop, I improve, whether it's a skill or as a person the most when I am the most uncomfortable.
yeah, my biggest fear, in college and when I was like big public speaking opportunities, getting up on stage and speaking to hundreds of people, reading a speech. I mean, I hated it. I dreaded it. It kept me up the night before. But I made a promise to myself, I'm never going to turn an opportunity down, not because I'm having fun with this, but because I have to get better at it. And I know in the future and the positions that I aspire to be in, that's going to be important. And so that repetition, that practice, going through some failures, going through some embarrassment, I started to find a tool of, I want to record video of myself so I can view the tape. And you start to realize, oh, I felt a certain way, but I didn't look a certain way.
Mm.
Oh, I was really comfortable in this format. Oh, I could do this. And you just get better and better and better and better and better. So being honest with yourself on the things that you're not good at, I think is as important of a skill as any. Because if you can't identify the things where the parts of you professionally, personally that are weak, you'll never get better. You'll
Yeah.
never get better.
What about coaching and mentorship? You just said if you can't identify, and I agree with you, but it does help if someone can identify them in you. Maybe before you
Sure.
do, maybe you never do, and just say, "Hey Zach, hey Kyle, you really got to get better here." Let me just put your dad aside. Have you had a couple key mentors or coaches that really made a difference in accelerating or being the catalyst for your development
Sure.
as a
I mean,
person?
I can think back to a couple professors all the way back to high school who, you're struggling to get the A for some reason on this paper, and you're working and you're putting in the extra time. That stuff is obviously important. I look up to several people, over the years as mentors. When I went to go get my MBA, that was another opportunity, frankly, for me to think about, do I want to go back to Monumental? Do I want to do something else? And I reached out to a great, great, great person named Don Graham, used to own the Washington Post. And, I sat with him for an afternoon. I spoke about, these are the kind of thoughts that I have. These are the kind of things that I want to do. And, he had a great third party perspective in explaining, these are the pros and cons of both. And hey, here's what I think you should do. And I ultimately took his advice. So
Looking forward, it I mean, geez, at a young age, the fact you were in college, like, taping yourself doing things that were uncomfortable, a lot of
I
mature.
would say I was doing that kind of post
Yeah,
college.
okay,
Yeah,
but I
yeah,
was
yeah.
still a lot of maturity at a young age, you're very disciplined, like, it seems to me, and I'm still getting to know you, it seems to me that you always had kind of and maybe it wasn't clear, but it's more than I did, a vision for to some degree what you wanted your life to look like and or maybe perfect career look like. No.
I
You
had a semblance of a vision, I would say, but you never know
Yeah.
where things are going to lead. And if you're focused on one track, you could miss the side door that opens, and there are multiple tracks. And I think for a lot of people, maybe who are in my position, you focus on getting good grades in high school so you can go to a good college, and then you focus on getting good grades in college so you can get a good job. And then as soon as you graduate, you're like, oh, there's no like a year after senior year. Like it's choose your own adventure,
Mhm.
and so you got to create your own structure. And my mantra has just been work hard, show humility, be earnest, be genuine, show gratitude, be good to work with. Don't be a jerk. I mean, these are pretty easy rules when you really think about it, and good things will happen.
You touched on something, and this is kind of where I was leading you, as you said, I think you said when I went to business school, that was like, do I want to go back to Monumental? You chose to. Was that a tough decision? Because obviously, it's kind of not these are my words, like air to the throat. Like you have this big opportunity here, but we also touched on maybe wanting to kind of blaze your own path. Like how hard was that decision? How long did it take you? And were there moments where you're
Yeah, I
like,
wrestled with it for
yeah,
probably, 4 or 5 months.
sure.
But then I was pretty comfortable with the decision I made. And the reason why I wanted to come back to Monumental, not only just because I love our teams and they feel like extended family to me, but I started to think about, well, how can I have the biggest impact on my community? I love the Washington, D.C. region. And I think owning, operating, managing sports teams and the impact that we have on our fans and our community is unparalleled. Going back to how we were starting this podcast, they don't hold parades for iPhone debuts. They hold
Mm-mm.
parades when you win a
Championship. Yeah.
championship. And man, it just gives me goosebumps thinking back on that. We've won a WNBA championship. We've won some minor league championships. We won championships in esports. We haven't won a title in the NBA, and it pains us. It pains me,
Pisses you
and
off. I can
and we're
tell.
and we're gonna work. We're working really hard to build a championship contender in the future. We're in the midst of a real rebuild. It's not for the faint-hearted. It takes financial and emotional wherewithal to go through, but we think it gives us the highest percentage probability of having a great team in the future. We want to win. And I just look at all the great work that we do to give back to the community that really matters to us. How we treat our fans, even as customers, is so important. I was hard pressed to think of a line of business that I could venture into as an entrepreneur or just as a professional, that would have such a deep impact on the community. And that's ultimately what attracted to me.
Now, a lot of the feedback we received over episodes is certainly, and I'm going to ask you this question a little bit, talking about celebrating the wins and all that, but it seems a lot of people are drawn to trials and tribulations, adversity, tough moments. And, it's clear as day in meeting and talking to you, and you've said it multiple times, I just love your community. Um, and then you also said, hey, it's not for the faint of heart. It was a couple years ago though, you guys were trying to figure out the team's place in the community in terms of location, and how that must have been really hard. Like, because well, first of all, it's a high stakes negotiation. And second of all, the reality, there is an economic reality to owning organizations. Like, they're not just these crazy money printed, like they're a business. And that must have been tough on you guys.
It was a horrible
Yeah.
personal experience. We love where our building location is, and I love the outcome that ultimately came through. And kudos to Mayor Bowser, frankly, for making it all happen, for saving the day. She was the Batman, and it was pretty amazing. Looking back, um, we have been one of the very few arenas across the country that's been privately owned, and we've taken great pride in that. We've invested $200 million back into Capital One Arena of our own money to keep it up to speed with its class of buildings. Our leagues work on CVAs. We split revenues with our players. As other new buildings come online or other renovations occur, there's typically a big point of business upside there. And if those teams can generate more revenue, player expenses go up for everyone. And so you don't want to be on the back half of that wave. And the age lifespan of these buildings is about 30 years. And just the size and scope of a renovation or building a new building, it's beyond most companies' capacities or abilities or
Sure.
whatnot. And so, there was a conversation and a deal to be had with Virginia that was very serious. And ultimately DC
Came through.
came through, and we're so appreciative, we're so thankful. It's where we want our teams.
I just
We've
can't
got a
imagine
great
the stress of it.
location.
Like, I'm thinking, like, again, part of my life is a real estate broker where, like, you get stressed of one deal. It's it's a transaction. Like, that's the ultimate deal. That's the ultimate transaction. That's the ultimate, man, that must have,
I'm very
and
pleased.
and problem is
Yeah.
also in that business, it to a degree plays out in the public forum, right?
Yeah,
And then the fans getting,
unlike other
yeah,
businesses, where
yeah.
things stay in a boardroom, I mean, we have a microscope, on our dealings all the time. And so it was hugely challenging, and I'm so happy that, we're through it, our deal is signed. We've even started some pockets of construction, and I think when our fans actually see some of these new areas and new finishes come online, it'll really
They'll get
be
it.
exciting.
Has there ever been a moment in your position and your connection, obviously, in terms of ownership, publicly, that you've ever been on, like on somebody's like, hey, pointing the fan,
I
pointing the
feel so
finger.
lucky in that
Uh,
99.9% of people are pleasant and super nice. And
yeah, true.
I think a lot of people know us too, and they know that we like to be friendly and,
Yeah.
happy people. But of course they're always gonna
The
be,
exceptions to the
the
rule.
exception.
Yeah.
Twitter can
Oh,
be
I know.
like that,
Twitter's
right?
not real life.
And
Yeah.
so, you kind of
Can't go
have
on
to
Twitter.
realize that that's just kind of noise.
Yeah.
And
That's just people working things out.
it really is. It's
Yeah.
more of a commentary about them than
I
you.
asked you that question just even as a kid, in my eyes, my dad can never make a mistake, but that's not possible. But maybe he made a mistake in a game, and we were mostly in Cleveland. Cleveland fans were amazing. Like, again, I'm sure you would argue,
Passionate.
yeah, they were passionate, but they were generally amazing. But you said it best, and like 99.99% are great, but there would always be one like, hey, and
When you're a little kid, it
oh,
bothers you. I
it
mean,
was tough.
I remember, yeah,
Sports talk radio was
we'd
really
lose in
bad.
the playoffs, and a lot of criticism
Yeah,
comes out when you lose in the playoffs, right? What
yeah.
went wrong? This guy's a bum. You got to fire that guy.
Yeah,
There's
it's
all that sort
tough.
of
Yeah,
talk.
and the players,
And as a
the
little
coaches,
kid,
but
that
even the
yeah,
owner,
that's
yeah.
harder to hear. And as you get older, now I've grown up with it. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah. You really do develop kind of a process for it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but you have to know what to listen to. And
Yeah.
some of the stuff is overboard, and you shouldn't listen to it at all.
Yeah.
But not everything is perfect, and
Yeah.
you gotta understand the temperature of a fan base
I'll tell you
too.
what I do sometimes is like my kids, like, oh, someone comes home and someone said this to me and it hurt my feelings. I say, hey, don't let people hurt your feelings, what they say. I always say, don't ever give them.
Easier said than done. Yeah.
Easier said than done. But what I do is like, if you ever want, I said, let's just pull up the Twitter comments on your dad or your your uncle or and we read them aloud at the dinner table as a family and we laugh about them.
You
And
have
so
to. You
I
gotta.
said, anyway, I
Yeah,
always found that good.
exactly.
So you're in this role, you're busy, you're doing a lot, but what is, and it's a broad question, what does the future hold? Like, where do you see yourself in 10 years?
I would, like I mentioned, I'd love to be a part of this organization for the long term. I'd love to help build this organization into the most valuable regional sports platform in the world. We have really good standing in our leagues on a variety of different committees. I'd like to continue to grow from that perspective too. I really hope we can always be looking at our leagues and our peers, our other teams and whatnot, and demonstrating ourselves as a model organization, as a positive and contributing member of the league. I don't think we ever want to be a free rider. We want to contribute. We want to help build value. Want to build value for our current shareholders in Monumental. They deserve that. They're entitled to that. Want to build value for our fans. Want to deliver on more championships. That's their ROI for their time.
Mhm.
We can deliver on that. And so, if we can win more championships, build a great business along the way, be positive contributors to our leagues, we'll leave a lasting legacy. That would make me pretty
This is
satisfied.
a question you don't have to answer. It might be, it's a privy, but like in conversations with the decision makers or your dad, or it's, the Prince of Monumental, eventually princes want to become kings, right? It's like, is that on the roadmap? Like, I'm going to call you up looking for some tickets here and soon. All right.
Well,
Like,
I can get you tickets today.
oh, sweet. There you go.
Um,
I need that.
yeah. Hey, my father and I are very tight, and
Like, you're like, hey, old man, like, it's time to come on, like,
no, I
go
don't.
golf.
No, I think he'll always be involved. I
For
think he'll
sure.
always be involved in some capacity. Maybe at some point he takes a minor step back, as he would deserve to do. Um, kind of talking about vision and where you imagine
Hmm.
yourself. Sure, you have lots of different ideas of where those things can happen, but I also don't want to take things for granted too, because
Sure.
lots of things can happen. There have been changes over the past few years, and I've become more mature as an executive, and I think that I do have some great opportunity, but I still have a lot to earn too.
And so, you've had the good blessings and fortune to have seen a lot, right? Especially in the amount of time you've been working. I love this question because it applies to anybody who's listening. Is what are what are some of the characteristics or traits that you see? Because earlier I asked like that you hire, you look for, but you've seen in general, whether it's in Monumental or in the schools you attended, or just business people that you've gotten to know, or we're in DC, politicians, right? Uh, that really consistently lead to people getting to where they want to go in life. And then conversely, like what are the one or two things you see, trappings, I guess you'd call it, that really keep people stuck?
hmm Um, okay, I'll answer that with two different characteristics. One would be I really value people who are genuine.
Hmm.
Right? If you're genuine, I can trust you. If you're disingenuous, if I feel like you're driving an agenda, that's a instant turnoff. It's really hard to work with someone. It's really hard to do a deal with someone who you don't fundamentally trust, who's disingenuous. So being genuine, and earnest in your time and giving it and wanting to learn. Not every relationship should be transactional. They should be a relationship.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one key characteristic. The other one, frankly, is probably someone's ability. And I think about this for myself, like their ability to figure it out.
Ingenuity.
You ingenuity,
Yeah.
right? And personal ingenuity, right? Because there are a lot of times you're facing a problem and you just go, I don't even know where to start. And so you don't start, you give up. And so having the ability to tell yourself, figure it out. You'll figure this out. Okay, where do I start? I'm going to start here. If that didn't work, I'm going to start there. And not taking no for an answer in that regard, having the self determination to pick yourself up and say, I'm just going to figure this out. I'm going to do the research. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to build a plan. It's important.
Yeah, I love ingenuity in anyone I work with, right? Even in teammates in the sports world, business partners, employees, and bosses. It's ingenuities. Figure it out. It's so important. And then I agree with you also very much on the being genuine. And you've been very genuine, especially in your humility, not but humility is, but you gotta let your hair down every now and then. So I want to ask you kind of as we get close to the end here is like, how do you celebrate your big wins?
Um,
I
I
mean,
s
I've seen you
yeah.
drinking and holding up a Stanley
Yeah, well,
Cup,
that's a little
but
bit
no, but
different. That's a
that's
very
a, yeah.
tangible event,
So like,
obviously.
how do you celebrate your
Well,
wins, your big wins, your small wins? Like,
celebrate with the team that you accomplished it with. You gotta enjoy those celebratory
yeah.
closing dinners or
Oh
something
yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
You gotta celebrate, over a quiet, glass of wine with your wife or
That's right.
something or
Yeah.
whatnot. And so, I think, I take celebration sometimes in a quiet moment, by myself even. So which is hard to find these days because 'cause I've got a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So,
Oh,
those times when do you have
yeah.
kids? Do
I
you
got 14, 11, 7, and 3.
Okay, well, yeah, so you're still in the
Yeah.
thick of it with a
I'm
3-year-old.
in it.
Yeah, you're still in it.
Yeah.
Um,
But my 3-year-old,
it's a
by the time
lot.
you have 4 kids, the 3-year-old's kind of like almost like a pet. Like you're like, you throw the ball,
Yeah, right, yeah.
like you kind of forget his name half
He'll
the
survive,
time.
it's
No, he's
fine.
like Murph. I have boy, girl, girl, boy. But like the way you parent your first, the way
It's
you parent
totally
your fourth,
different than the rest, yeah.
because you're different. You're a different person. You really are. Life has changed you. Life has, continued to develop and evolve who you are as a father, as a person. But um, yeah, enjoy it. It goes by quick.
Yeah, I know, my 3-year-old, I can't believe she's
Are
already
you gonna keep
3.
going, or are you done at 2?
We've been
Keep
talking
going.
about this.
No, no. So the answer
I
is yes.
think
You're going for it.
I think
Unless it's
I
a
mean,
hard
we'll
no,
see,
it's a
I don't
yes.
know.
And I'll tell you, I've met a lot of people who regretted not having more kids, but I never regretted people who had too many.
Yeah, okay, you know what? I believe that. I
Yeah.
believe that.
Never met someone
We
who's like, man, I had too many kids,
we got 2 little girls, and they're
Yeah.
amazing, and, they keep us up at night, but
Yeah.
they're, our whole bundle of joy.
Yeah. You can have the excuse. Well, I got to go for the boy where they have 10 girls. They're all amazing. I got 2 girls with 4 personalities.
There you go. I think having girls is sweet. I mean, they're like
Uh,
little angels, and, like, I see some of my
yeah.
friends who've got little boys, and the guys are, like,
Little
crawling up
terrors.
on walls,
Yeah,
and
I always say you love your sons, you fall in love with your daughters. It
I
just hits
like that.
different.
I like
It
that.
hits. Not to sound sexist, it hits dads. Daughters hit dads different, and
Yeah,
sons hit mom
I
different.
definitely
Yeah,
imagine being wrapped around
yeah.
my
Like my
girl's little
son's, I'm like, ugh,
fingers.
like especially now he's 14. He smells. He got hair. You're like, dude, you almost you
Take
got
a
to get out of my
shower. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
house soon, all right? Yeah,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
shower, but like you're mama's boy, I
It's
can't do
funny.
any wrong in mom's eyes. And then on the opposite, my wife and my daughters, yeah, they'll just be button heads. I'm like, I got this. And they're daddy's girls, but no, it's special.
Exactly. They're
Well, that's
only 2
very
years apart, so I'm looking forward to them starting to interact and play with each other a little bit more.
well.
That'll be sweet.
Interactions go both ways, so
Yeah, I
they're gonna
bet. I
interact.
bet.
They're gonna be
I
fighting
bet, and
too.
everyone tells me once I get to
Yeah,
high
well, that's
school,
cool. I
I'll
can't
be
thank you enough, Zach. Congratulations on all your success. We got to get a championship for the Wizards
we gotta
and
get
another
back.
one for the Capitals,
That would
right?
be awesome.
You championship caliber, you know, basketball player over here. If you
Yeah,
want to
there you
sign
go.
me,
Maybe the 10-day will be the
yeah. Zach's
difference.
pointing to the great chase.
There
Talk to
we
the
go.
audience real quick. Alex Ovechkin, he's the hockey guy.
Yep.
Is 8 goals away from Gretzky, right?
He's from breaking the record.
And that's
And
like the
so
all time. It's kind of like
Alex has an
LeBron breaking Jordan's, but maybe it's even more special.
it's kind of like the home run chase
Oh,
in
no, sorry,
baseball.
Wilt's. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, this was a seemingly unbreakable record. Wayne Gretzky scored 894 goals and has a couple thousand more assists. I'm not sure. The points record for Wayne might be safe. I don't think anyone ever thought a player in the modern era could sustain this level of goal scoring for as long as Alex has.
Wow.
Most people fall off, really after the age of 30. And basically, Alex's whole career, he's been able to score 40 or more goals.
That's
So
incredible.
there's something unique and special about Alex as a person, as an athlete. He's got natural physical gifts,
Sure.
clearly, but he's also clearly got the mental fortitude and the discipline and training to do something special. And Alex, for him to be able to break this record with one team, all with us in Washington, that
That's
is legacy
incredible.
building, and that is something that we will share and have forever. Our fans will have forever. We feel so lucky and appreciative, and it's not it's not just a shiny record or something. We have a good team too. Alex is a competitor. He demands that we have a good team. We've got one of the best records, if not the best record in the entire NHL right now. And so his goal scoring is helping to push and propel winning. And so I think it's not just a novelty in that regard. He's going to go down as the greatest goal scorer in NHL history. And we've got a great team because of it too, which is pretty special.
Yeah, there's always in the greatest of all time conversation, right? Regardless of sports, whether it's Gretzky or Jordan or Alex, it's Kobe. There's a foundation of skill that you have to have in professional sports, respectfully. Like, none of those guys were bad athletes relative to their sports. None of those guys were bad athletes, period, right? So first is the athletic side, but then you could argue almost any player in a professional setting is a really good athlete. What separates those players from like the great ones, it's that, and you said the IQ, that athletic intuition is what I call it. Like, I heard Coach Saban talk about athletic intuition. It's just like there's a game intelligence that you could watch all the film in the world, but they're so smart. And the greatest of all time, there's that last thing, which is like burning desire. You see it in Gretzky, you see it in Jordan. Like, there's that chip on their shoulder, whether real or imagined, whether they create it out of thin air. It's like something drives them to play above and beyond.
Typically, those guys hate losing more than they love winning.
Very much so.
You
winning is relief.
You can to not lose, to win, because you're just so competitive, and you got to love the game. You got to love competition.
Well, here's to more winning with the Wizards
awesome.
And continued success. And even, again, another championship wouldn't be the worst thing for the Capitals.
It wouldn't be the worst.
And all your other teams. I can't thank you enough for
thank
joining.
You so
Zach.
much for having me on the show. Thanks for coming to our studios to do it.
Well, hold on. If I may, I would like to, maybe buy the studio off you if we could just ship it to Nashville. Like, this is
come back anytime.
This is great. I love it.
It'd be fun next
I'm
time
gonna take you up on it. And then next time you're in Nashville for
I love
Capitals,
Nashville. It's a great time.
hit me up.
Awesome. We'll do it.
Thank
you so much.
Yeah.